All right, welcome to part 3. Just as a quick review, let's take a look at where we've come. So we have various components. We have the food card, which is essentially this right here. Has the title of it, a caption, and a edit button. We have the form itself, which can be revealed just by clicking this plus button. A few different fields representing the food, and the list is essentially this lovely list right here. Now we have currently 2 different models. We have the food model, which we've worked with quite a bit already, and we have this entry model, which we're going to be dealing with next. And we have a couple providers, one provider for the form and one provider to keep in memory the list of all of our foods. The intention here is we're going to have different lists. This one is just all, so we're building it with a family to allow multiple versions of this, multiple instances, but currently we only have all. We have our food list screen, which is what you see on the screen right now, and we have a service, we have the base service, which works with Hive to essentially get the box. And then we have the specific one for foods right now. There'll probably be some refactoring here to move some other things over to base service once we start to see some of the patterns here. I do want to iterate with this project. I'm trying to keep it pretty simple, trying to make this a fully offline only app, not requiring internet, so the database is local using Hive. I have never actually used Hive before, and you can probably tell because I'm just kind of looking at the docs and putting stuff through, but I have heard good things about it, and so far I'm liking it. It's a lot like just kind of using like Firebase database, but completely locally. And what's cool about it, the way that we're kind of building this, is if we wanted to change this to Firebase, it would be pretty trivial to do. We would really only have to kind of make some updates in probably our services to talk to Firebase instead of the Hive database. So this is actually a practice I'm liking, and maybe on my next app I'll actually mock it fully in Hive and then move it over to a different backend service, such as like a Postgres Django app or Flask or even Firebase. Okay, so next thing I want to do is set up an ability to add what we're calling entries. So this is kind of like a meal tracking app for trying to be healthy, I guess. And although we want to keep track of all the foods so you can reuse them on any given day, the intention is you're not going to just re-enter a food every time you're entering what we're calling an entry. And right now an entry is just a food and a date of when you ate it, I guess. We're actually going to change this to a string because we did that on the food item just because the database uses strings as its keys. So what I need to do is actually run this build runner function because we are using freezed, which is essentially a code generator. And you'll notice it generates all this boilerplate code for like copying and serializing data and comparing and stuff like that, stuff that we don't really want to be doing manually. Okay, so now that that's almost done, it's still going, I'm going to make a new file, and we're going to call this entry list screen. Dart. And let's just look at our food list screen. So I'm just going to actually copy this. Let's just get rid of a couple files we don't need. And let's copy this over and rename it to entry list screen. Copying stuff is always fun. And we'll just call this entries. And we're going to, we'll keep the floating action button, but we're going to get rid of what it actually does. And we're going to just make the body right now maybe a size box temporarily. And then all I'm going to do is go to our main.dart, and instead of showing the food list screen, we are going to be showing the entry list screen. So there we go, entries. Obviously, the intention here is we're going to have a tab bar eventually to go between foods, entries, and maybe some other stuff. But for development purposes, this is a totally good way just to get the pieces together, then we can figure out how to connect all the dots. Okay, so where should we start? Let us make a provider. So similar to our food list provider, we're going to want one for entries as well. So I am going to copy and paste this and make something called entry list provider .dart, and we will just rename all of these things to entry list provider. Now we will have to go to the bottom one because this should be a lowercase, otherwise we're just overriding everything we just made. Now our entry list won't use a food list type, it will use an entry list type. And similarly, let's have all, or I wonder if the best way to do this, yeah, you know what? Instead of using an enum to control our family, we're going to use a date. And it's just going to be a string representation of a date, so like year, month, day, day, something like that. So we'll require that to be passed in. And then the model that we're actually controlling will not be food anymore, it will be entry. So that means this has to change to entry. We can pass in some entries. And we're going to update all this anyways, so I'll just comment it out for now. And let's just get rid of this code, and let's just, actually, I'm just going to, just because we're probably going to have some duplication here, I'm just going to comment these out. And then down here, we'll want to change this to entry, and the actual type will be a string. And this is actually called date now, and that's just a convention that we're using, date. So essentially this, because it's a family in Riverpod, we can actually have, we will have this one pattern that we can conform to, but we essentially can have many of these living in memory, and each one will be for a different date. So let's just save that. Okay, now what we should do is work on our service for this. So I'm going to open up the food service, and we are going to, let's just remember our base service. This just gets the box with the name, so that's totally fine. What else in here? Yeah, we're just going to get rid of a couple things that aren't being used, and I'm going to copy and paste this too. Entry service .dart, and we'll just rename this to entry service. So its box name, we'll just call it entry as the box name. That's kind of like the database table name, if you want to think of it that way. And we're still going to get the box based on that, and we're going to get all the items. But the items in here will not be foods. They will be entries. And we'll import that. And we'll just call it entries. And this actually kind of worked out kind of funny. Entry in item.entries. Yeah, this should be... No, this is just W. Yeah, entry and items.entry. Okay, then we take this, and we're basically creating the data the way we want it. So we're taking whatever's in that, and then we're actually setting its ID based on the key, just so we can work with it in a nice way. And now this is where we have to change, and this needs to be entry.fromJSON, and then we want to return entries. Now, because this is telling us it's listing this, we also need to remember to update this. So now we'll be able to get all entries. Now we're going to want to update this eventually to only get entries maybe for a particular date, but this is fine for now. Okay, for create, let's go through this. It's going to return an entry, a nullable entry in case something goes wrong. And so we get the box, and then we want to go entry.isSaved. Now something doesn't exist yet, but we will set that up in a minute. And we create, essentially the way this works is we're getting, we want to get the ID of it if it is already saved. If not, we're going to generate a unique identifier by using the short hash function on a unique key. And we're going to want to put in the box entry.toJSON, and what we're actually going to return is the to JSON version, or we're going to return an entry by using by converting this to JSON and in this factory, and then we're going to be setting the ID based on that. So entry.isSaved does not exist. Let's fix that, and that's just a setter we're going to put on here. And if we open up our food one, first of all, we do need this in order to kind of set our own custom things. Entry, and then I'm going to take this, we're going to take a couple things here. We'll start with the one I was talking about, which is saved. So if the ID is blank, because that's going to be our default ID, we know if the ID is not blank, we know it has been saved. And this factory will actually be entry.empty, entry. And a lot of these things don't exist on an entry, but we do have a food, which we're going to have to set, and I'll set that as by default just food.empty, which is what exists here. an empty food by default, and we need a date, an entered at, and we can just use date time dot now. This will kind of be like, a blank entry. It's going to be a blank food, and it's going to have a no ID, and it's entered right now. Okay, so now that we have that, we shouldn't have an error here anymore, and I think we're good. Okay, so that's the create. That one all looks good to me. Delete. We're getting the box, and we're deleting by the ID. We're returning true, and otherwise we're returning false. All right. Awesome. So let's just close some things up, get organized again, and then we have to rerun this because we did make some changes to our entry model. You'll see there's kind of an error being told right here to us, and we'll let that run. Okay, so now we want to do something. Let's start by creating, just so we have stuff in our database. Last time we kind of started by listing, and we had to do these, kind of create this data through a mock method, but let's do it the opposite way this time. We'll create first and then deal with listing them. Okay, so for adding a food entry, there is in theory a form, but let's remember what's in this model. No mistake. There's an ID, which is going to be auto-generated. There's a food, which is a reference to another model, and there's a date time, which to me will also be auto-determined based on the time now. Now, at some point, we might want to have an ability to edit it and be like, oh, I actually had this yesterday, just to like backtrack my data. But for now, let's just assume it's going to be as simple as choosing a food, because everything else will be auto-generated. So what I'm kind of thinking is clicking this will show us a list of foods to choose from. So what I'm going to do is in our components, we're going to make something called food picker.dart. And this will start as just a stateless widget, food picker. And we're going to extend base component so that we have, consumer widget, my mistake, so that we have access to Riverpod and all that stuff. And whenever we're doing a consumer widget, we have to remember to conform to its build constructor by passing in that. Okay, so, and actually I'm going to rename this to food picker modal, because it's really going to be a modal, and that's, you know what, food picker's fine. I've changed my mind. Okay, so now we have food picker, and let's just return text saying, hello, food picker. Okay, then what we're going to do is on our entry list screen, we have this, this function here. And we're essentially going to do a show modal bottom sheet, and the builder of it, which takes context as one parameter, is really just going to return the food picker. I highly recommend when you are using show model sheet to essentially just return a component. The reason is if you're actually constructing your whole component widget tree right here, hot reload is not going to work. You'll have to actually close it and reopen it again. This will allow us to still make changes in here with it open and be able to develop a little bit quicker. This can be a const, at least for now. Okay, then that will show us our food picker when we click this. So let's see if that works. There it is. Hello, food picker. And what we're going to do is wrap this in a safe area. And this won't make a difference for Mac, even though this looks like an iPhone app, it's really a Mac app. It's not going to make a difference, but for iPhone and everything, it'll add extra padding to the bottom for things that are not in the safe area. And then we're going to actually wrap this in a column. And let's make sure we do main axis size. Oops, sorry, I put that in. Should be right here. Main axis size dot min. Otherwise, it's going to try and take up all the room it can. And let's give it a cross-axis alignment of start so that things will be left aligned. And all around this column, we're going to add our own padding. And let's just look at our other component we made, the food form. It had a padding of 16, so let's do that. So they kind of look similar. Okay, so now we should see, hello, food picker. And again, in our food form, I'm going to copy this to my clipboard because this is what I'm going to want to use. And we'll make the text actually say choose food, and give it a style equal to what I just pasted. And then we'll at least have some something consistent between our two components. Okay, also in the screen, entry list screen, I meant to do one more thing, which is scroll control. Is scroll control true? Just in case our list gets really big, it'll allow the contents of this to actually scroll. You won't be able to see it now, but if it gets really big, we will want to allow that, especially for smaller phones. Okay, so now what do we want in here? Well, let's start by just putting in the food list, and we'll use food list type dot all. And let's just see. I'm gonna add a couple commas here just to make this a little bit better, and let's just see what happens here. Ooh, we have an issue, and I think this can be fault. I believe. Okay. Let me just try something. I think we might just need this in an expanded. And let's rebuild. There we go. So now we have that. Yay. So we kind of have our food and everything here that you'd be able to, in theory, select. But this might be a little, there's a little bit of extra stuff we don't really need. Like, we don't really need the ability to edit when you're choosing a food. So I think what we're going to do is actually build our own, a separate component for this. Obviously, you could decide, oh, we'll just reuse this, but add some options to it, such as, allow, like make dense or something like that. But we're just going to do this kind of as a one-off sort of thing. So I'm going to get rid of the food list, and instead we're going to have a list view dot builder, and that will take context and index. And we'll want to make sure that our item count is equal to something important here. So how do we get that item count? Well, we're going to want to get a reference to it. So let's call this foods, and it's going to be equal to ref.watch food list provider. And here we will pass in the identifier, which will be food list type dot all. And now we know this is going to be a list of foods, list food. Foods.length is how many we want to do. Okay, now let's just save that. And then in here, we actually are going to run a return something. So let's use a list tile again, and we will just give it a title of food dot. Sorry. I like to do this too. Make something called this, and that's going to be foods at index. So the title will be food dot title or dot name, and of course we have to wrap this in text. Close that. And now we see these here. Now with our list tile, we can do a couple of other things. We can do dense equals true, visual density dot compact, and that'll make things like a little bit smaller there. And this is bothering me. I just want another. There's also one more we need to do. There we go. That looks a lot cleaner. And here we have, this this chooser. Now it doesn't do anything yet, but let us add a trailing button. Let's just have an icon, icons.add maybe. Yay. And we're just going to make it, we're actually going to wrap, I think, these list tiles in a card just to make them kind of feel a little more like a button. So you get these lovely things here. And that looks pretty, at least functionality-wise, this should work for us. Maybe what we also want to do, although you can, in theory, drag down to close it, we should probably have kind of like a close button up here. So I am going to wrap this in a row, and we're going to then add a, let's just use an icon button on pressed, and the icon will be icons.close. So then we got that there. Then on our row, we're going to do main axis alignment dot space between, and that'll put the X over there. And then we obviously want this X to do something. So let's make that happen. And all we want to do is really just do navigator.ofContext.pop, which will close the window. There you go. And that's something we might want to do on the other, on the form as well. The difference between that one is it's never going to take up, this much room. So really clicking any of this will work. Okay, I'm also curious. I just want to play for a minute. Yeah, there is a way to shrink wrap. I think that's the one I want. Shrink wrap, true. Okay, perfect. So what I did, I got rid of the expanded and I put a shrink wrap on this, which will make its height not infinite. It will only make its height as tall as it actually is. So that will, I got rid of all that extra space there. Now, we got this. Okay, we're eventually gonna have like a search bar and all this cool stuff, but let's get the basics working here. Right, let's just see. This can be a const, and this can be a const. And boom. Okay, the last thing we want to do is have an on press event. So rather than, because this food picker might be something we use for different things, what we're going to do is actually we are going to allow a function to be passed in here called onSelect, and onSelect, and the function itself will have a food item in it, and we'll just call it, we'll just call it food, and then we're going to require this because otherwise there's no point really having it. Required this dot onSelect. So now we'll see over here there's an error because it's expecting this, and this will no longer be able to be a const because it won't be. And you'll see that this will actually be casted as a food because we told right here that it's expecting a food to be the parameter. And let's just see if this even works. So I'll go to my debug console, and it's kind of telling me hot reload's not going to work probably because I got rid of that const. And let's just click this. Oh, but we missed we missed one pretty important thing. We also want on the list tile itself, on tap, we want to call that on select and pass in the food that is happening right here in this loop. So there you see that's kind of filling in some new things there. Okay, and we want to run the onSelect, and then we also want to navigator.ofContext.pop once selected. So we'll do that, and let's just test it out. Banana 3 closes, boom. Okay, so here we go. We have the onSelect, so that's pretty. That's working all right. So the next thing we want to do is obviously do something with this this food item. So the best thing I can think right now, we have our entry list provider here. So let's add a new function that's called add. I'll call it add entry, and it will be async. And we're going to do some stuff here. So on select, we can basically go ref.read, and this will now be the entry list provider dot notifier, because we want to, oops, sorry, I forgot one thing, dot notifier. We need to also pass in the date here. So let's for now just kind of pass in a temporary string, because we're not going to worry about that just yet. And on this, we want to add an entry. Okay, and we also have to create that entry. So let's do that. Final entry equals, and we go entry. Actually, you know what? The way this makes more sense is let's actually, when we add add entry, and for now we're just going to pass in a food when we do this, and we'll do all the logic here. So instead of creating this here, what we're really adding in is this food. And then over here, we're going to then want to create an entry based on this. So we can then essentially make a new entry. Entry is going to be equal to entry. And the enter.dat will be datetime.now. The food will be the food we passed in. And ID is something that we don't know yet. So we're just going to make it blank. And one other way we could do this is, and I'll just comment this one out. We can take an entry dot mistake. Entry dot empty, and then we can actually do a copy with. So we can take the empty version of it and pass in the food, and go pass in that food. Because the thing about this empty thing is that actually when we construct it, we already get the date time now, and we already get the ID. The ID will already be blank, and then if we ever change our logic of what the default ID would be, we only have to do this one spot. So I kind of like this approach here. And then we would essentially take the state of this. Remember, this is state of entries. So we can go state entry, take whatever the current state is now and pass in the entry. And this will get it in memory of the list of entries. However, we haven't dealt with saving this to the database. So let's do that. We can go await entry service dot create, and we're going to pass in this entry. And the cool thing about this create function is it already kind of handles the, hey, if the ID is blank, I'm going to create a unique key and all that kind of stuff. And this will actually send us back a new thing. I'm going to call it saved entry. So it's returning the version that's going to have the ID already associated with it. Now this could be null if something goes wrong. So we'll want to go if saved, and I actually want to make this saved entry. If saved entry does not equal null, then we would set that, and instead of using the entry that we created here, we're going to actually add the saved entry. That way its ID is already there. Okay, so now if we click add, assuming we've saved everything, and choose Apple II, we will get an error here. Awesome. I think I know what's actually going on. Sometimes there's like a serialization issue that's happening right now. And let's just ensure that's the case. I'm assuming it's happening here when we're trying to convert an entry to JSON, because the data that it has a sort of like a relationship to something else, and that's not being serialized correctly. Okay, so basically, yeah, what's happening is when we're trying to, when we have a nested model, so the entry has a food, Dart's is essentially passing the food object in as the Dart implementation of it, not the to JSON. So a fix for this, I believe, I haven't tested it yet, is in our pubspec.yaml. We can kind of add this to configure our JSON serializable to always explicit to JSON. And let's just, and then you do have to rerun the build function again, which I already have while I was paused. And let's just see if it works. All right. I fiddled a bit. The correct way to do it, although it will show this kind of warning, is on top of our factory, we need to denote it as JSON serializable, explicit to JSON true. That way you'll see now I'm printing out what happens, and the food itself is no longer a food object, but the JSON itself. So that's just something to keep in mind, and it'll allow us to work with this the way we want. So yeah, now if I add one of these, we'll see no errors happening. However, we don't really have any view right now of our data, so let's handle that now. We're just assuming it's there because no errors are being thrown. I'm pretty confident. Let's find out. Okay, so our list provider, what we're going to do is, instead of getting a list of the food service, we're going to do it from the entry service. and dot list, and then we're going to set the state to that. Then on our entry list screen right now, we're just returning a size box. So we're going to actually make a new component called entry list.dart, and I will try and spell it right. Okay, this is going to be pretty similar to our food list, so let's open that up. Food list. And yeah, I'm going to copy this and pull it over. And we will make this say entry list instead. And here we're going to have a string of the date that's going to get passed in. And make sure to require the date. Then entries equals ref.watch entry list provider. And we're going to be passing in that date object, which again is just a string version of the date. We'll probably do something like, year, month, day. Okay, so now we have a list view, and we want to basically do the entries.length, and then the entry is going to be equal to this. And for now, I'm going to get rid of everything that we actually have here and just return, let's do a list tile with the title of entry.food.name. And then lastly, in our entry list screen, instead of doing the size box, we're going to do entry list, and we do have to pass in that date, and let's just use food. I think we have foo bar somewhere else. And there we go. There's our entries coming in, and if I were to, for instance, add banana 3, we can. Let's try adding another apple too, and it does work because these are all, although they're the same foods, they are essentially the different instances because they're wrapped around that entry object. Okay, so now we have an entry list. That's pretty cool. Let's while we're sort of at this, let's deal with a couple other things here. So maybe a subtitle. We'd want to actually put in the entry.enter.dat. Now let's just do .toString for now, and we'll actually see when it's gone in. Now that's something we'd probably want to format a bit nicer, saying like the time or something like that. But whatever, this is fine for now. And let's also add a ability to delete this. So we will wrap this list tile. First of all, let's wrap this widget in a card. And I think that's, yeah, then it looks a little bit nicer like that. And let's, underneath this card, wrap it in a widget called dismissible. We've done this already. Dismiss, it's a hard word to spell. And we want to have a on dismissed, and that takes the direction. Whoa. And what else are we missing here? Probably a key, right? Yeah. Key will just be key of the entry.id. That should be capital. And then now we should see that this is something we can now rotate. We also want to make the dismiss direction dot end to start, so that we can only do it this way. And behind this whole thing, let's wrap this with a container and give it a color. Colors dot red dot I don't know what we did before, but oh yeah, that's going to be a problem. It's because we have this card. Let's actually just get rid of the card. Remove this widget. Awesome. And we'll give the list tile itself a color. Let's see just what we did in the food card. So we had a list tile. Okay, yeah, right. It wasn't on the food card. It was on the food list. So we had a container, red. We used shade 400. Let's use that same one. And then essentially the list tile itself, or the food card, was in a container. Color colors dot white. Okay, so now we should see, yeah, and that'll go away. But it's not really doing anything. It's just being taken out of the list. And okay, so here we go. Here we do have an error that we probably need to solve. Some type of map string dynamic cast. So it's trying to load the data in, and there is, now a problem. Okay, a little bit of fiddling. We're also going to set this thing any map true, which will just allow when we're converting between JSON points that it doesn't necessarily have to be string dynamic. It can be dynamic, which is what this was expecting. So I did that for the entry, which fixed our problem, but let's also do that on the food itself. So that's just right where we did this explicit JSON. It's another thing, any map true. And I believe it's just because Hive, is a little more open-ended than, just allowing strings as the keys. So this is going to make it, work for us. And it is. We're seeing our entries here. Okay, so we still have this potential to delete. But as I was saying before, it's not actually deleting it. It's just removing it. So let's get to that. So what I want to do first, we have our entry list, and we kind of started building this sort of thing here. I'm going to extract this widget, and we're going to call it entry card. Let's just see. So, yep, it's expecting an entry, which is exactly what we want. Now, personally, I just like to have these above. That's just me. And I'm going to take all this, and we're going to actually make a new component called entry card.dart. And we're going to put it here, and we're going to import in the things we need, which are these two guys here. And back in here, we just have to import in entry card. Okay, so now we have this. Now I do want to make this a consumer widget instead, which again requires us to pass this in. Widget ref. Okay, so now we can actually do some stuff on the dismiss. So let's get an access to the how do we do this with the food card, first of all? Food card. Oh, you know what? It wasn't actually, the food card wasn't the thing with the dismissible, and that actually makes sense. Technically, this should be our, I'm gonna kind of undo what we did here. And let's just get this back to where it was, and I'm just gonna get rid of everything in this file. Okay, so we should be back to how we were. Really right now what the card is this right here. So let's extract this widget, and we'll call it entry card. And we're going to do the exact same thing we did. Pull this into here, import some things in. And let's make it a consumer widget, which now requires us to have a widget ref called ref. And then over here, entry card. Okay, so let's open up our food list and just see how we did this. So on dismissed, we essentially run the delete function, and then we refresh, or we run the remove at. So there's two things. One, remove it from the database. Two, remove it from the list. So we'll do that same sort of thing. Await entry service. Now on dismissed. Yeah, there's something weird here. I'm actually just gonna copy this. It's gonna basically be the same. Okay, so instead of food service, we'd be using entry service.delete, and we're gonna want to pass in the entry.id. And on our entry list provider type, again, we're just gonna use foobar. This will be probably our next project, is actually making this make sense. We're gonna want to remove at index. That doesn't exist yet, so let's open it. And we already kind of have it here. Remove at. Yay. Entry list. So now this is happy again. So let's try it out. Let's get rid of banana 3, and let's just rebuild. And there we are. It's gone from the database. Let's try adding a new one in. Let's add banana 3 again. Let's rebuild. Make sure banana 3 still lives there, and we will. Okay, interesting. The ordering. I wonder what it's ordering by. That is a great question. To me, we should probably be ordering by date. It's probably ordering by like that auto-generated ID. Let's try deleting banana 3 again. And banana 3, it'll go to the bottom. and now it's up there. So the fact that it kind of moved into different spots, I think it's something to do with the ID, and we can probably figure that out by going to our entry card and actually making let's just temporarily make the subtitle text of entry.id. So 1A1, yeah, my logic was correct. Okay, so this is something that we should probably handle. Let's go to our service, our entry service, and I'm just going to get rid of, we kind of have a bunch of print statements in here we don't need. Entries dot sort, and this is our compare function. So we're going to have A and B. So it's going to look at each one, and what we can do is look at A dot entered at is less than B dot entered at. Now you can't actually compare dates that way, so I think it's entry dot entered at dot is after B dot entered at, and this is either going to require us to send back a 1 or a -1. And let's rebuild. So now banana 3 is at the bottom. I believe that's working. In order to really know for sure, let's just look at this. So we'll see the time 12:06, 12:06, 12:07, 12:09, 12:20. So cool. So every time we're gathering this list now, we're just going to sort by the date. And this just magically kind of worked. I just guessed. I was lucky. It could have gone the other way. Okay, so now we have our entries, and we have our can't see it right now, but we have our food items too. Okay, let's add a fish. Yay, let's remove the fish. So currently we're expecting the user already has a food item in their list that they want to pick, but I'm sure there'll be cases where they'll want to create a new one right from here. So let's figure that out. So I'm going to go to our picker, food picker, and what do we have right now? We have choose food, and we could just add a I wonder if, let's put the icon button, just gonna clean this up a little bit. Let's put the icon button over here, and what I'm actually gonna do is wrap this widget in a row, but make sure that its main axis size is main axis size dot min, and then we're gonna move the text within it. So now we have a row inside of a row, and over here, let's just add text for a second, test. So now we actually have the X right here to close, and then this test button over here, which is all good and fine. Let's make this now a I think just let's use an elevated button, sure. And text will be create new, something like that. Okay, so now we have a button here to actually go and create a new one. Now, how is this going to work? Well, what we're going to want to show is essentially that form, which is pretty easy to do. In fact, we can just look at the list screen, the food list screen, and we're going to literally just copy and paste this and import in the things we need. So now the on-click for this will show this over top of this one, which is fine. And all that is will get us partway there. We'll at least be able to add the food, but we need a way to then, when this is done, actually go and use that in the same way that we are allowing the on select to happen. So a few ways to do this. What we'll do, let's make this an async function, and I'm going to await this, and yeah, I think this will work. Okay, let's go to our food form. So notice we have I think we have a navigator.pop here. Okay, and that's just for the that's obviously to close it after we're done. Now, something that's kind of cool is we can actually pass in, when there's the success. So success equals null, show snack bar, food.name. I think we might have to make a change here too, because this returns a bool. We're actually now going to need to return something else. So we're going to actually return a food item here. And here's our new food. So we'll return the new food. Otherwise, we're going to return null. Okay, now over here, it's no longer success. So this will be called new food equals this. If new food equals null, we'll just return and won't do anything. If new food, and now that we've already returned out, we actually don't even need this anymore. We're going to actually pop with that new food. And when you're awaiting something like a show modal bottom sheet or an alert, the pop item will actually come back here. And this, unfortunately, will be dynamic. So it's not the most type safe. There might be a way to make that a little bit better. I'm just not too sure if that's even possible. But essentially what we can do now is, because we have that, if food does not equal null, let's start by just printing food. And we'll go here, and I'm just going to, just because we have a few print things, let's just like kind of do this. Okay, so now I'm going to go like this, and we'll call this grape. I don't think we've ever done grapes yet. And create it. And you'll see grapes got added. We knew that. I mean, we could expect that would happen, but we also got this item back, grapes, to this. So now, exactly like we do on the select, we can actually run this same select function, again, only if true, and then we're also going to want to then pop out of this. Okay, so I'm just going to rebuild to make sure we're working well. So let's test a couple things. I'm going to do fish. Okay, we got fish to come in, and then we're going to go create new, and let's do bread. We love bread. 2, 3, 3, 4, great. And bread got added to our entries list just like that. And then this is now something we can reuse really easily because it's in our, in our master list. I can keep adding bread for days. I can, remove a bread. Everything is great. All right. The next thing I want to manage is the ability to kind of have different days, essentially. Right now, everything's kind of like one day, and we're just using a temporarily foobar. You'll see we kind of have this temporary thing, foobar, foobar, foobar. So I want to have a way to manage what list we're looking at for the entries. So I'm thinking the way to do this is we actually have a new provider called, let's call it like entry date provider .dart. And I'm just going to open up one of our other providers, as I pretty much always do, to look at what we need to have here. So this is going to be called entry date provider, and it's going to extend state notifier. And what we're going to keep in here is a string that's going to represent our date. So it's going to be something like, year, month, day. That's what I'm thinking we're going to have. And here we might want a ref. This will not be a family. We're just going to have one sort of like global one, so we're not going to worry about passing in something like that. And the entry date provider, we're going to require the ref to be passed in, and we're going to require a string to be passed in as well. So string date, and actually let's just call it date string. No, date's fine. We know it's a string. And super, we want to use this. So I actually meant to call this initial. Okay, so we have the starting of our thing, and then I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom here, and we're essentially going to make a final entry date provider, state notifier provider, and this is not a family, so we need to then, we're passing in this, and then the second parameter is whatever the model is that's in the state, and we're going to have access to only ref in this case. Oops, other bracket, and we want to construct the entry date provider using ref and the initial. This is where we will actually construct the date. For now, I'm just going to write today's date, which is 20th, 12/20th. What I'm going to do is actually just change this, instead of an arrow function, I'm going to go like this. Oops, I missed something there. Cool, and we actually want to return this. Then what I can do is make a date. Date is going to be equal date time dot now, and then we need to format this date. And this is always something I forget, so I like to Google Dart format date as year. Sure, something like this. Using the international package. I mean, this isn't, instead of, we could just use a package, but this is actually a fine way to do it. Let's just do this final date string equals, and we're just going to take, I'm just going to call this D, just so we don't have so much repetitive. So D dot year, D dot month. We're constructing our own date dot day. All right. Then we can pass this in instead. So by default, we'll be using, anytime you open the app, we'll be on today's list of entries. Okay, cool. Then what we're going to want to do is have a way to set this, and it's going to take, in fact, I think when we set it, let's actually make the default one, which will be setting a string called date, and all we have to do is go state equals date. But let's go set with date, and this will be, instead of that, we'll be passing in a date time called date, and I can essentially just do this, and we'll just call it D to keep it the same, and then we can go state equals date string, instead we can just actually do this, state equals that right there. Oh, right, and we don't need this comment anymore. Okay, so now everywhere that we had foobar, so there's a couple places. Let's just close some things. What we'll actually want to use here, so whenever we are, this one actually, the entry list, we're going to use the date that was passed into it, okay? So we don't have to worry about doing it there. Here, though, this is where we'd want to use our ref dot, and we'll actually watch it. And this will be the date, entry date provider. And you'll see that this actually will return the string version of whatever it is. And similarly here, the value here is going to be this. Okay, so in theory, this, now I'm going to refresh, and we're actually not going to see any differences. It's just, they're all using still the same thing. Okay. The next thing we can do is, just to kind of, I guess, prove more or less that this is working, let's put our entry list in a column, and then we're going to make this one an expanded. This shouldn't change anything. But up here we can actually put some text and we can essentially watch this. And what I'm going to do, because I'm noticing we're duplicating this, date equals, we're going to watch that, and the two other places we have this, let's just Command D and make that date, and we can actually then put date in text right here. So I know this doesn't necessarily prove anything yet, but we have, we're showing kind of like the date here. What I want to do is make a new widget, and we'll call this date switcher dart, and it will be, I'll start with the stateless widget, date switcher, and actually let's call it entry date switcher, and rename this as well to entry date switcher. Gonna get rid of these, gonna import properly, and we're gonna make this a consumer widget. And here we're going to actually return maybe a row with some children. The first children will be maybe an icon button, and we won't do anything with it yet. And this will be icons dot arrow left, maybe. And then we'll have another one for arrow right. And let's just add some commas. But then in the middle, we will have text of the date itself. In order to get that, we're just going to grab this same thing here. Yay. Then this text will be that date itself. Okay, so I've done this. We have the date. Let's also just style this a bit. Theme.ofContext.textTheme. We'll just use headline medium maybe. And we do need to, of course, in our entry list screen, instead of putting this, we're going to use our entry date switcher. And it's going to be a const. So now we have this cool thing here. Yay. On this row, let's make the main axis alignment, space between. And then we got these cool buttons. Yeah, they don't do anything yet, but they're there. Okay, so let's make that work. So we can basically, I'm going to make a reference to the provider here, and it's going to be ref.read entry date provider.notifier. And now we can essentially go provider dot, and I'm going to write this without it existing, but I'm just going to call it maybe like back and then one for forward. Okay, cool. So let's open up our provider now and let's make those things back and forward. Now we are, because we are using a string here, this does, get a little bit annoying to work with, but we can do that annoying thing once and then we shouldn't have too much of a problem. So let's just make something called string to date, and this will take a string of, we'll just call it value, and then we'll make another one called date to string. This will just let us work between these really easily. So we already kind of have the functionality for this one, date to string, and this should actually be a date time. And what really we would just return, and we'll just call this D. Oops, date to string. Cool. Then we can actually use this now by essentially going state equals date to string, pass in the date. These methods, in my mind, likely we could even move them to a tills function. They're not going to even be specific to state. That's why they're not actually setting the state. But they're fine here for now. Okay, so that means we have that, and then string to date. So I think we can return date, time, and it allows us to pass in a year, a month, and a day. So we can actually get those values, just by going value.split or final D equals value.split. So we're going to split on those dashes that we have here. And we can essentially go year is going to be equal to D, the first entry in it. Is this how you might have to actually, let me just look at the constructor for date time. Yeah, it allows us to pass in. Okay, yeah. So what we need to do is actually parse ints on these, and we could do that each time, or we could actually map these, and then E is fine, and we want to actually return int.parse E. So now we'll actually have a list of ints, right? But sorry, it's an iterable of ints, then we convert to a list. And now it knows it's a list of ints. So then we can actually go D0, D1, and D2. Now, this isn't, the ideal way to do it, especially if this was something that, was using user-supplied data, through an API or through a form, because this could easily break. Like, what if for some reason the string was malformed, was using, underscore instead of dashes? I'm not recommending this is necessarily the best way, but we have complete control over how this code all works, so I'm totally fine to do it here. So then we return that. Okay, so then in here, because the state itself is a string, we need to basically, when we want to go back, we go d equals string to date, and we take the state. And then we can go d dot, this should be a date now, right? No, it's not. I think it's just because we are not, let's actually tell these what they're sending back. And we want to subtract a duration of days 1. And let me see, does this actually, this does. So we should just be able to return this. And this will be a const. And we can do the same thing here. Take the current state, and instead of subtracting, we actually add. Okay. And did we actually save this file is the question. It looks like we did. Provider.back. Okay, cool. And we're watching the date. Okay, so this is not quite working yet. Because we're not, sorry, we need to actually edit the state to be that, oh, yes, that's the thing. Okay. This whole thing then needs to go back to a string. Like, we're basically taking a string, converting it to a date so we can work with it easier, and then converting it back. So we then want to essentially wrap this whole thing in date to string. I'm not, there's more elegant ways to do what I am suggesting here. But this works for me. State equals this. State equals this. Okay. So we're no longer returning, and it does work. So there we are. Okay. So this list isn't changing because we don't have anything in our API and our service to actually only give us things by date. But we have a way to sort of manage the state that we're looking at. And what's kind of cool is I can go back to any day, and we can refresh, and it will go back to this because we're not saving in Hive what our date is. It's just in memory. Obviously, this picker could use some extra things, like maybe there's a calendar button to go and select one. That's fine. Maybe there's a quick button just to go back to now, back to today, all those kind of things. And we can definitely go to town and make that better. But I'm just working on the core functionality right now. So I'm going to leave it there. We're an hour in to this third part, and I hope you've learned a lot.